As I stepped into the living room, Daniel's grin was the first thing that caught my attention. His overly casual tone immediately sent a wave of unease through me. "Olivia, you're back." I set my suitcase down, studying his expression carefully. "I am," I answered, my voice laced with caution. Something about the way he smiled felt off, too smug, too self-satisfied. "What's with that look?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. He waved a hand dismissively, as if brushing away my concern. "Oh, nothing," he said, though the twinkle in his eyes suggested otherwise. Then, with a dramatic flair, he added, "Well, I suppose you'll find out soon enough. I made a significant business move while you were away." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "What kind of move?" Daniel leaned back against the arm of the couch, his smirk widening. "Your jewelry collection," he declared, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I stiffened. "What about it?" He didn't hesitate. "I sold it. Every single piece. And before you get upset, let me just say, you'll thank me later. That jewelry of yours? It funded my empire." The world around me seemed to blur as his words sank in. My collection, the pieces I had spent years gathering, some inherited from my mother and grandmother, others bought with my own hard-earned money, gone. Just like that. "What did you just say?" My voice came out quiet, trembling with restrained fury. Daniel let out a chuckle, completely misreading my reaction. "I said I sold it, Olivia. Do you have any idea how much those diamonds were worth? Enough to kickstart a venture that's going to put us on the map. It's genius, really. You should be proud." Proud. The word tasted bitter as it left my mouth. My hands curled into fists, rage simmering beneath the surface. "You had no right, Daniel. That was my jewelry. Do you even realize what you've done?" He rolled his eyes, his impatience evident. "Oh, come on. It's not like you even wore most of it. It was just sitting there collecting dust. Now it's actually being put to good use. My name is Olivia, and if there's one undeniable truth about my marriage to Daniel, it's that his ambition has always taken priority over everything else. When we first met, I admired his drive. The way he dreamed big and pursued his goals with relentless determination. I believed in him. But over time the cracks began to show. The charm that once drew me in masked a deeper, unsettling pattern. He would bulldoze anything or anyone that stood in his way. And yet, despite everything, I never imagined he would go this far. The jewelry wasn't just a collection of expensive trinkets. Each piece held meaning, woven into the fabric of my life. They carried stories, memories, pieces of my history that Daniel had so carelessly discarded, as if they were nothing more than collateral for his ambitions. But what he didn't know, what made his arrogance almost laughable, was that I wasn't as careless as he believed. Months ago, after hearing about a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, I had taken precautions. Hidden within the clasps of my most valuable pieces were tiny, discreet tracking devices. As furious as I was, I forced myself to stay composed. Let Daniel bask in his supposed victory, because the game was far from over. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty drawer where my jewelry box had once been. The absence of it left a hollow ache, a tangible reminder of what had been stolen from me. He hadn't just sold jewelry. He had erased irreplaceable moments of my life. The sapphire ring my grandmother had given me on her 80th birthday. The diamond bracelet my mother had worn on her wedding day. The gold pendant I had bought as a gift to myself after landing my first big job. Each one had meaning. Each one had been cast aside for Daniel's so-called empire. My fingers hovered over my phone, itching to call him and demand answers, to unleash the full force of my fury. But I knew better than to act on impulse. Not yet. Instead, I opened the tracking app one had installed months earlier. The screen illuminated with a map, red dots scattered across the city like breadcrumbs. My pulse quickened as I realized they were still active. One of my necklaces was at a jewelry consignment shop downtown. The bracelet? Already transferred to a warehouse in the industrial district. The app even showed timestamps, marking the journey my belongings had taken as they changed hands. A cold, determined satisfaction replaced my initial anger. Daniel thought he had outplayed me, but he had underestimated me. I had evidence. If the tracking data was accurate, not only could I retrieve my possessions, but I could prove exactly what he had done. Without hesitation, I dialed the one person I knew I could trust. As soon as she answered, I didn't waste a second. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You're not going to believe what Daniel did." There was a brief pause before Rachel sighed on the other end of the line. "What now?" she asked, her tone already exasperated. I wasted no time, launching into an explanation of everything. Daniel's betrayal, his arrogant attitude, and most importantly, the tracking devices I had secretly installed. By the time I finished, Rachel was just as furious as I was. "Olivia, you have to go to the police," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. I exhaled, feeling a flicker of resolve take hold. "I will," I promised. "First thing tomorrow." After we ended the call, I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the glowing red dots on my screen. Each one marked a piece of my past that Daniel had stolen. But unlike him, I wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. He had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, my nerves were taut as I stepped into the local police station. My phone was clutched tightly in my hand, my heart pounding. Filing a report like this wasn't something I'd ever had to do, but Rachel's words echoed in my mind. "You have to go to the police." She was right. If I let Daniel get away with this, he would only keep pushing further, testing just how much he could take before I fought back. At the front desk, a uniformed officer with a kind face greeted me. "How can we help you today?" I took a steadying breath. "I need to report a theft." His expression turned more serious. "Was it your property?" "Yes," I confirmed, gripping my phone a little tighter. "My jewelry collection. It was sold without my consent." His eyebrows lifted slightly at that, but he gave me a nod. "Let's get some details." He motioned for me to follow him to a desk, where I laid everything out: Daniel's actions, the sentimental and financial value of the jewelry, and the tracking devices I had embedded in some of the pieces. When I pulled up the app and showed him the active locations, his demeanor shifted. "This is excellent evidence," he said, jotting down notes. "If the tracking devices are still transmitting, we might be able to recover some of the items." "I have a list of what was taken," I said, pulling out a notebook where I had painstakingly recorded each piece along with its approximate value. It felt surreal watching him flip through the pages, seeing my memories reduced to a series of bullet points. The sapphire ring, the diamond bracelet, the gold pendant. They weren't just possessions, they were parts of my life, now scattered across the city because of Daniel's greed. The officer, whose name tag read Detective Sullivan, looked up from his notes. "We'll start by verifying the locations of the tracking signals. If they check out, this could be a relatively straightforward recovery. However, since your husband sold them without your permission, this also falls under fraud. Are you prepared to pursue charges?" The weight of his question settled over me. A part of me hesitated, knowing the kind of fight this could lead to. But then I thought of Daniel's smug grin, his dismissive tone, the way he had stolen something irreplaceable from me without a second thought. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I want him held accountable." Detective Sullivan gave a resolute nod. "Good. Let's get started." Walking out of the police station, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, knowing that the authorities were taking this seriously. Anger, recalling Daniel's arrogance when he admitted what he had done. And most of all, a deep, burning determination. For years I had let him take whatever he wanted: my time, my energy, my trust. I had convinced myself that the battles weren't worth it. But this time was different. This time I was fighting back. By the time I arrived home, the adrenaline had started to wear off, leaving behind exhaustion mixed with anxious anticipation. I replayed my conversation with Detective Sullivan in my head, wondering how long it would take before Daniel realized the police were involved. The thought unsettled me. Daniel had always been good at twisting situations to his advantage, spinning himself into the victim no matter how blatant his wrongdoing was. I had seen it before, how he could manipulate, deflect, and charm his way out of taking responsibility. But this time he didn't know I was one step ahead. That evening, Rachel showed up at my place, a bottle of wine in hand. She wasted no time sinking onto my couch. "Okay," she said, pouring us each a glass. "Tell me everything. How did it go at the station?" I filled her in, detailing the evidence I had shown Detective Sullivan and the steps they were planning to take next. She listened intently, her face shifting between outrage and admiration. "You're handling this better than I would," she admitted once I was finished. "If it were me, I'd probably be at his office flipping desks right now." Despite everything, I let out a small laugh. "Trust me, I've thought about it. But the police have the tracking data, and I think that's my best shot at getting everything back." Rachel raised her glass with a determined glint in her eyes. "To you for not letting that smug jerk get away with this." I clinked my glass against hers, the resolve inside me solidifying. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Seeing Detective Sullivan's name on the screen, I answered immediately. "We've verified the locations of the items," he said without preamble. "Two of the pieces have been located at a consignment store downtown, while another has surfaced in a warehouse," Detective Sullivan informed me, his tone brisk and efficient. "We've spoken to the store owners and they're cooperating with the recovery process. I'll keep you posted as we move forward." A wave of relief crashed over me. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Thank you," I said, barely able to contain the tension in my voice. "Does this mean I'll actually get them back?" "It's looking promising," he reassured me. "But the investigation isn't over yet. There's something else we've uncovered, something that may go beyond just the jewelry sale." A knot formed in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Sullivan hesitated for a moment before continuing. "We've been reviewing your husband's financial records, and there are some irregular transactions tied to his business accounts. We're not jumping to conclusions just yet, but it's worth looking into. This might be bigger than we initially assumed." I felt the air leave my lungs. As if selling my jewelry behind my back wasn't enough, Daniel might have been hiding something far worse. After the call ended, I found myself pacing the kitchen, Sullivan's words looping through my mind. This could be bigger than we initially thought. What else had Daniel been up to? What else had he kept from me? By the time the evening rolled around, I had made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I was going to confront him head-on. When Daniel walked through the door, he looked as smug as ever, his confidence grating on my last nerve. Tossing his keys onto the counter, he barely spared me a glance. "Busy day. What's for dinner?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Daniel," I said, arms crossed tightly over my chest. "We need to talk. Now." His smirk faltered just slightly, a flicker of wariness crossing his face. "What's with the serious tone?" I let out a sharp breath, struggling to contain my fury. "You stole my jewelry to fund your so-called business, and now the police are investigating you." The color drained from his face, but only for a second. He recovered quickly, forcing a dismissive chuckle. "Police? Olivia, you're overreacting. I didn't steal anything. That jewelry was just sitting there collecting dust. I figured you'd appreciate it being put to better use." I stared at him in disbelief. "Better use?" My voice was steady, but the rage in my chest threatened to boil over. "Daniel, that jewelry was mine. You had no right to sell it. And now, thanks to your reckless decision, the police are looking into your finances. They believe this is just the beginning of something much bigger." His expression darkened, irritation flashing in his eyes. "You went to the police?" His voice dropped, tight with barely concealed anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You're turning this into something bigger than it needs to be." I let out a cold, humorless laugh. "I had to, Daniel. Because talking to you never works. Every time there's a problem, you twist the narrative, shift the blame, make yourself out to be the victim. But this time? This time there's proof. And you won't be able to charm your way out of it." Daniel's jaw tensed, his posture stiffening. "You're making a huge mistake, Olivia. If you think you can tear me down like this, you've got another thing coming." I didn't flinch. "No, Daniel. The mistake was ever trusting you in the first place. But that ends now." The silence between us thickened, heavy with unspoken threats and the crumbling remains of whatever trust one had left in him. His usual arrogance seemed to crack, just a little. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine anymore. This was about reclaiming my power, something I had let Daniel strip away from me piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to fight. The following morning, my phone rang. Seeing Detective Sullivan's name on the screen, I answered instantly. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his voice even but firm. "We've successfully recovered 3 of the stolen pieces, your diamond bracelet, the sapphire ring, and one other item. We're still tracking down the rest, but there's been an unexpected turn." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of turn?" There was a brief pause before he replied. We've uncovered financial transactions linked to your husband's business that suggest fraudulent activity. Some of the funds tie back to the sale of your jewelry, but others involve external accounts that raise serious concerns. My breath caught in my throat. You're expanding the investigation? Yes. This is no longer just about the stolen jewelry. It may be part of something much larger. I sank onto a chair, my fingers tightening around the phone. Daniel wasn't just impulsive. He wasn't just self-serving. He was dangerous. What does this mean for me? I asked, my voice quieter now. Right now you're not implicated, Sullivan assured me. But we'll need your full cooperation. If you have any additional information, we'll need you to share it. Your husband's actions could have serious legal repercussions. I swallowed hard. Understood. As the call ended, I sat motionless, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Daniel had betrayed me, stolen from me, deceived me, but I had never imagined it could run this deep. And now the walls he had built around his lies were beginning to crumble. This wasn't just about me anymore. Daniel had been playing a dangerous game, and it looked like he was finally about to lose. What had Daniel gotten himself tangled up in? Selling my jewelry was one thing, but fraud? The thought alone made my stomach turn. The man I had once loved, the person I had trusted with my life, was becoming unrecognizable. It felt as though I had been living with a stranger all along. That evening I called Rachel, my voice tight with frustration. The police think Daniel's involved in something much bigger, I said, pacing the living room, my thoughts running in circles. They're going through his business accounts now. Rachel didn't sound the least bit surprised. Honestly, Olivia? I saw this coming. I stopped mid-step. What do you mean? The way he acts, like the rules don't apply to him? It was only a matter of time before it caught up with him. I sank onto the couch, running a hand over my face. But how did I not see this? How could I have been so blind? My voice wavered with a mix of anger and grief. I married him. I trusted him. And now everything feels like a lie. Rachel's tone softened. You couldn't have known Olivia. He's good at hiding things, at manipulating people. That's not on you. I let out a shaky breath, trying to absorb her words. It doesn't make it hurt any less. No, but you're doing the right thing, she said firmly. You're standing up for yourself. That's what matters now. Her reassurance helped, if only a little. But beneath it all, anger and betrayal still churned inside me like a storm waiting to break. Later that night, Daniel came home. The usual arrogance that he carried like a shield was nowhere to be seen. Instead, frustration simmered beneath the surface, barely restrained. He closed the door with a little too much force, then turned to face me. I know what you've been up to, he said, his voice low and dripping with venom. I met his glare without hesitation. Oh? And what exactly would that be? The police? The bank? Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've caused? His hands clenched at his sides. I scoffed, folding my arms. I didn't cause this, Daniel. You did. And now, for once, you're finally facing the consequences of your own actions. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You really think you've won? I held his gaze, unwavering. This isn't about winning, Daniel. But you're right about one thing, it's not over. Not by a long shot. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face, so quick it was almost imperceptible. Without another word, he stormed past me, disappearing into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. And I didn't feel defeated. I felt stronger than I had in years. The next morning, my phone rang and I answered without hesitation. Mrs. Hayes, Detective Sullivan's voice came through, steady yet serious. We've recovered several more pieces from your jewelry collection. They were tracked to a private Sterling and Company auctions. A rush of relief filled me. Does that mean I'll be able to get them back soon? My voice wavered between hope and exhaustion. Yes, Sullivan confirmed. We're working through the legal channels to return them to you. But there's another development. My body tensed. What is it? There was a pause before he continued. The financial records tied to your husband's business reveal evidence of tax evasion and embezzlement. This investigation is growing. By this point, nothing surprised me anymore. I let out a slow breath, absorbing the information. Daniel wasn't just reckless. He was deeply unethical. Thank you for letting me know, I said, my voice firm. As I hung up, my resolve hardened. I couldn't let Daniel's downfall become my burden. That afternoon, I took a step I had been avoiding for too long. I reached out to a lawyer Rachel had recommended, someone with expertise in both family law and financial recovery. Sitting in her office, I recounted everything: the stolen jewelry, the financial investigation, the tangled mess that was now my marriage. The lawyer flipped through her notes before glancing up. This is a complicated situation, but you've already taken the right steps by involving the authorities. I nodded, my fingers gripping the edge of the chair. What happens now? We'll start by filing for a formal separation and securing your personal assets, she explained. It's critical to establish financial boundaries immediately. The reality of it all hit me like a freight train. I had never imagined myself sitting in a lawyer's office, preparing to untangle my life from Daniel's. But after everything he had done, I knew this was the only way forward. What about his business? I asked cautiously. Could I be affected by all of this? The lawyer gave a measured nod. Potentially. That's why it's important we act now to ensure your finances remain protected. The sooner you separate yourself legally, the better. Later that evening, as I sat at the dining table reviewing the documents she had given me, my phone buzzed again. Rachel, how are you holding up? She asked the moment I answered. I surprised even myself when I responded with honesty. I'm okay. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I'm in control. It's not easy, but I know I'm doing the right thing. You are, Rachel said without hesitation. And don't forget, you're stronger than you think, Olivia. A small smile tugged at my lips. Thanks, Rachel. As I ended the call, my gaze drifted toward the stack of legal documents in front of me. The road ahead wouldn't be simple, but for the first time, I felt prepared to face it. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Detective Sullivan at the police station. Mrs. Hayes, he began, gesturing toward a file on his desk. We've successfully tracked down almost all of your jewelry. It was funneled through high-value sales channels, but both the auction house and consignment stores involved have provided full cooperation. A weight lifted off my chest. That's a relief, I admitted, exhaling deeply. It wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about justice. About taking back what was mine. And for the first time, I knew without a doubt that I wasn't going to let Daniel, or anyone else, take anything from me ever again. And Daniel? I asked, my voice steady as I sat across from Detective Sullivan. What's happening with him? The detective leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the desk. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Between the unauthorized sale of your jewelry and the fraud linked to his business, the district attorney is moving forward with charges. He met my gaze, his expression firm. He's not walking away from this. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. Satisfaction because justice was being served. Sadness because the man I had once loved had thrown everything away, our marriage, our trust, for greed. That evening, Daniel came home late. I was at the dining table, surrounded by legal documents, bank statements, and paperwork from my attorney. He paused in the doorway, his face clouding with suspicion. What is all this? He asked, nodding toward the papers. I didn't even look up. Divorce filings. My voice was even, devoid of emotion. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I saw genuine shock flicker across his face. You're divorcing me? The disbelief in his voice might have been almost comical if the situation weren't so tragic. I met his eyes without hesitation. Yes, Daniel. This is the end. I won't let you drag me down with you any further. He scoffed, raking a hand through his hair. You really think you'll come out of this untouched? I built everything for us, Olivia. Everything I did was for this family. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You didn't do it for us, Daniel. You did it for yourself. You stole from me, lied to me, and left me to clean up the mess. I shook my head, my voice growing steadier. This family? It was never about us. It was always about you. His confidence wavered, his bravado slipping like a mask that no longer fit. He took a step closer, as if he could still convince me otherwise. You don't mean this, he said quietly. You can't mean this. I exhaled, my resolve like steel. I do. And you'll know just how serious I am when you're served. For the first time, Daniel had no comeback. No charming deflection, no calculated excuse. He simply turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. I sat still for a long time, the sound of his departure ringing in my ears. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of reclaiming my life. The next morning, my phone rang. Olivia, my lawyer said, her voice both professional and reassuring. The papers have been filed. Daniel will be served later today. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you. I know this isn't easy, she added gently. But you've handled it with strength and clarity. Keep focusing on your next steps. We're here to support you. After we ended the call, I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window, coffee in hand. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and frustration. But now, for the first time, there was something else: clarity. My jewelry was being recovered. The police investigation was progressing. The divorce filings were in motion. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting, I was taking control. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Detective Sullivan. Mrs. Hayes, he began, his voice carrying a sense of finality. I wanted to inform you that formal charges are being filed against your husband. Between the unauthorized sale of your property and the financial fraud linked to his business, he's facing multiple counts. Relief flooded through me. Does this mean I'll be able to recover everything he sold? It's likely, Sullivan confirmed. The evidence is strong, and the auction houses and consignment stores involved have agreed to release the items back to you once the legal process allows. He paused. But more importantly, Daniel is finally being held accountable. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thank you, I said, my voice calm, steady. As I ended the call, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal, the lies, the sense of loss, it was all still there, but it no longer consumed me. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't looking for justice just to hurt Daniel. I was simply ready to move forward. That evening, I met Rachel for dinner. She grinned, raising her glass. To Olivia, she declared. The woman who didn't just survive, she thrived. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. I wouldn't go that far, I said with a smirk. But I'll take it. Rachel leaned in, her expression turning serious. You're stronger than you think, Olivia. You took control when it mattered most. Don't forget that. Her words settled deep inside me, a reminder of just how much had changed. For years I had let Daniel's ambition overshadow my own sense of self-worth. I had given and given, believing in a man who had never truly prioritized me. But now as I looked ahead, I saw something I hadn't in years: possibility. A week later, Detective Sullivan called again. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his tone lighter this time. We've recovered all but one piece of your jewelry. The final item is still being traced, but the majority of your collection is ready for you to reclaim. The weight on my chest finally lifted. Thank you, Detective, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. You have no idea how much this means to me. We're just doing our job, he replied. But if I may say, you handled this situation with remarkable strength. Not everyone takes the steps you did. Later that day, I went to the precinct to collect the recovered pieces. Holding the sapphire ring my grandmother had given me and the diamond bracelet that had belonged to my mother, I felt something settle inside me. This wasn't just about jewelry. These were pieces of my history, my legacy. And now they were back where they belonged. The day Daniel was formally charged, I received a text from him. You really had to drag this out, didn't you? I hope you're happy now. I stared at the message for a moment before locking my phone. There was no point in responding. Daniel had made his choices. Now he was finally facing the consequences. And my energy? It was better spent on rebuilding, on moving forward. That evening, I went through the final paperwork with my lawyer. Once the divorce is finalized, your financial separation from him will be complete, she assured me. His debts won't touch you. I nodded, relief washing over me. That's exactly what I need. It wasn't until later that night, sitting in my quiet, peaceful home, that I truly felt the weight of it all. The betrayal, the anger, the heartache, it was still there. But it no longer had power over me. I had learned to set boundaries. To fight for myself. To let go of what I couldn't control. As if on cue, my phone rang. Rachel. So she said, her tone light and teasing. What's next for Olivia Hayes? I smiled, looking around my space, finally reclaimed. Honestly, I said, laughter in my voice. Anything I want. For the first time in years, my future belonged to me.